Welcome back to the Friday show presented by the Jockey Club. August 3rd, save that date. It's coming up soon. Jockey Club Roundtable moving this year from Sunday to Thursday. It's Whitney week. It's Hall of Fame week. All kinds of good things going on in Saratoga Springs that week. I'm Ray Paulick, joined by Joe Nevills, our bloodstock editor, and Lisa Lazarus, CEO of the Horseracing Integrity and Safety Authority, otherwise known as HISA. Lisa's been with us before, and we're glad she's back. Lisa, the anti-doping and medication control program went into effect just over a month ago.
And it's exactly a month ago, because aren't we June 22nd today?
Yes, it is.
We're at the 1 month anniversary.
So from what I can tell, the world is still spinning. The sun still comes up in the east, and everything seems to be not that different. How has the first month gone with HIWU, let's see, Horseracing Integrity Welfare Unit, running the program for HISA?
So as you can imagine, it's been a massive undertaking to bring all of anti-doping testing under one entity, under one system. And a lot of, I know that HIWU spent a considerable amount of time, auditing the various states, understanding their processes, their personnel, reaching voluntary agreements with various state racing commissions to be ready to deploy the program. And I have to say, I'm incredibly pleased with how it's gone from an operational standpoint. HIWU is really professional, very collaborative, and has really tried to support existing infrastructures where they were working well, and to replace them, I think, where they needed improvements or where there was sort of an underinvestment in safety or integrity. So from that standpoint, really good. In terms of what's different, I think one thing that probably everyone's noticed is that if a horse tests positive, we call a banned substance, which is a doping substance, different from a therapeutic overage, that trainer and horse are automatically suspended, even before the B sample comes back. So we have a few examples of that already up on the website. And I think as journalists, you'll be pleased to know that you receive that information only one day after the covered person was notified. So I think that's a big sea change in terms of transparency, public disclosure. And also, I personally believe, having come from different regulatory systems, one of the biggest, I think, negatives to what was currently in place was the fact that cases could drag on for so long. And that folks that had positive tests were incentivized to delay the process. Well, now that's kind of been flipped with regards to doping substances, because there's an incentive to move forward quickly if you're suspended during the pendency of the proceeding.
Mm-hmm. So can you elaborate on that a little further? So much of suspensions under, the previous system has been, take it to court, delay. At what point can a horseman, an offending person, take something to court? What is sort of the appeals process for that, as opposed to, the previous thing?
Sure. So one thing that our program does is it kind of comes in line with almost every sports regulatory country in the world, I'll say, horse sports and also human sports, which is that these cases go to an arbitration process. I don't think I'm aware of any other sort of sports governing body or sports governance where, athletes or participants can take their case directly to court, right? So what happens here is that depending on the nature of the case, and I guess I want to take a minute to emphasize that one thing I really love about our program is that there's a very clear distinction between banned or doping substances and controlled medications, because we view those very differently. Obviously for us, one of them, the banned doping stuff is really cheating, stuff that should never be in a horse, that seriously puts the welfare of the horse in jeopardy. And while it's incredibly important to manage medication programs responsibly and effectively, those don't put horses in jeopardy for the most part, and are often mistakes. And so we want to treat them differently. So because of that, we have this different treatment. But what happens is that a controlled medication case, a therapeutic overage, will go to what we call the internal adjudication panel first. And that's comprised mostly of stewards, either former or current stewards who've gone through an application process. And in some cases, sort of experts from other equine sports. And then the banned substances, those will go essentially to an arbitrator through our GEMS arrangement, which is a professional organization that supplies arbitrators, particularly in sports. So once they go through that process and there's an outcome, they can appeal to a court. But for the most part, stays are not available. So while they can appeal and obviously have as much due process as the system allows and as they're entitled to, it doesn't mean that they can delay the outcome or the sanction.
They can still get an injunction or no in court?
No,
they can't. Okay.
Yeah.
Interesting.
I mean, for the most part, obviously a court can do whatever, a court does, but generally speaking, that's not a remedy available.
I know there's some differences between the old system and the new system in terms of split samples. For example, in state systems, trainers, I guess, have a list of labs they can go to and request the sample be sent to a certain lab. The new program does what?
So this is actually really important. So one of the things that I also think is an improvement in the new program is we only have 6 laboratories. Okay. And that allows for, I think, better cooperation, better alignment, better harmonization. And one of the cornerstones of any successful anti-doping program has to be that the labs are working in sync, that they're looking for the same substances at the same levels. Okay. So we have 6 laboratories. If there's an A sample test positive, what happens then is the covered person can request the B sample, but then HIWU selects which lab that goes to. That's primarily for efficiency. So if there's they're typically going to look at maybe the closest lab, but they also are going to look at labs have various strengths and weaknesses and various levels of expertise. So there are some labs that are very good at a certain category of substances and looking for the Bs at those, and other labs may have different strengths. And so I will work with both the lab capabilities and strengths, as well as logistics and location and cost.
In the month that we've had so far during the rollout, have there been any major surprises that you found?
One surprise, and I have to say I'm really pleased about it, and I'm also have to give HIWU some credit and their education team, which is that my biggest fear is that we were going to wake up a couple weeks after the program rolled out and there'd be like hundreds of medication overages because levels have changed a little bit. But that's not the case, and we haven't publicized any yet because they have a longer timeline. Obviously, to kind of request the B. There are a few, but it's a handful. And so what I want to say about that is that I think the HIWU team did a very good job, particularly Dr. Mary Scalay, educating stakeholders about that transition. Because as you can imagine, trainers were mostly interested in the medications because they're part of their program, they're completely legal, and they wanted to make sure they weren't going to kind of make a mistake. And so I think they paid a lot of attention to those educational initiatives. And I believe they were obviously successful because our labs can absolutely find medication overages. There's no issue there. And it has not been overwhelming.
The labs can also find contaminants, things, human drugs where people may have interacted with a horse, or mistakes in a barn where there's a contamination, where a drug gets into a system of a horse it wasn't intended for.
Yeah.
What's different about HISA and HIWU in the way they handle suspected contamination cases?
Sure. Well, there's a couple of things. One's from just the creation of the program. The program's goal is to identify risks to horse welfare and risks to integrity. Okay. And of course, we're going to capture, a fair amount of stuff in there, and some of that is going to be mistakes, but overall, that's the program's goal. So to start with, the levels and sort of the thought process around how we test and what we report takes into consideration contamination levels. And that's point 1. Point 2 is that we have a program called the Atypical Findings Policy. And there's 27 substances currently on that list that if a horse tests positive for one of them, they go through a special process. And the reason why they're on that list is because they're a substance that shouldn't be in a horse for a performance enhancing reason, but could be found in a horse accidentally or through contamination. And so that goes through a process. It goes through a scientific review and an evaluation. If at the end of the evaluation, the sort of committee or folks reviewing it believe that it's more likely than not it was caused by contamination, that case never even gets notified to the covered person. So essentially, it's like it never happened. They'll know about it because we'll allow them to participate in the process, but it doesn't get notified to the public. It doesn't end up on the website, and it never ends up as a violation. If after that period of time they actually believe that it wasn't likely to have been a contaminant, then it gets notified like every other case.
So is there a burden of proof on the covered people to, if there is one of the unusual findings, to find like, oh, my groom had a patch or something, or, is taking certain medications or something? Is that on those connections to find that, or is that something that you're able to kind of parse out yourself without them even being involved?
It's a combination, the review. So, HIWU will reach out to the covered person and ask them some questions, what feed are you using? What was different about this horse? We'll ask a lot of questions to understand the circumstances. But they'll also look at the science. One of the things that the scientists can sort of do is look at the concentration level of the substance and get a sense of timing and get a sense of sort of the whole picture of what happened. And through that, they'll be able to make a determination. And to be honest, with atypicals, they'll err on the side of the most generous interpretation to the covered person, given the risk of that substance being a contaminant.
During Belmont Week, HIWU presented some numbers as far as tests, the number of tests that they had conducted at that point. What I didn't hear is of the tests that have been done, what percentage are post-race versus out of competition versus, I guess, TCO2 testing is a separate category. And then you have vet list testing as well. Do you have a breakdown approximately of how those?
What? I don't off the top of my head. What I can tell you is that there was a tremendous amount of out of competition testing compared to what the industry is used to. Like I know, for example, just over Belmont weekend, they tested over 100 horses at a competition. I know that, therefore, I believe that the post-race might be about half, and the other half is divided between out of competition, TCO2 and vets list.
I think it used to be less than 10%.
Yeah, no, it's a lot higher because ultimately I believe that the intention of the program is to be strategic, to catch the stuff that we want to catch, not to, play gotcha or to unfairly penalize someone who's just trying to, sort of do their job sort of thing. So because of that, it's structured in a way to really find the stuff we're trying to get out of the sport.
Can you elaborate a little further on the out of competition testing? How far out does that reach? Is that strictly licensed areas like tracks and training centers? Does that reach out to farms and sort of private centers? How far does that go?
So, we talked about this over a very long period of time, and we decided at HISA that the easiest way to explain it, the clearest way, is the rules follow the horse. So if it's a covered horse, we can test you anywhere. Now, we won't come onto private property. What we'll do is we'll notify the trainer. Your horse has been selected for out of competition testing, and you have 6 hours. We can come to you or you can come to us. We'll give that choice to the trainer, right? So if they say, sure, come onto my property, you have permission and test the horse, great. If they say, no, I don't want you to test the horse, we'll say, well, you're half an hour or 20 minutes from this facility or this racetrack, and you got to bring your horse there. So we give that choice to the trainer, but the rules follow the horse.
Gotcha.
Well, let's shift a little bit to the original rollout of HISA, which was the racetrack safety program.
Yeah.
What I'm still seeing on the HISA website is the vast majority of violations are whip violations. Are those declining in number as jockeys are learning the system? I would hope they are. At least.
They really are. They've declined very significantly in number. They've especially declined with regards to loss of purse. We see almost very few of those currently. When we first launched, it was a subject of a lot of debate, a fair amount of consternation, but now it seems to have really settled. And it seems that the industry has accepted the rule, and we're actually, hearing from stewards that it's sort of helping the game in that the jockeys, this is anecdotal, right? This is not necessarily my opinion, but we're hearing from stewards is that jockeys are running kind of straighter in the stretch, that there's less interference, that it feels safer. And frankly, I think the public prefers to watch racing where you don't see an excessive amount of whipping.
And again, loss of purse is the limit is 6 strikes. And if you get to 10, over 6 is a violation, but loss of purse doesn't go into effect until you get to 10.
Correct.
Is that something that you think, or the feedback you've gotten from the stewards, that they've gotten better at sort of spotting a actual whip strike versus, flashing the whip, showing the whip, something that looks like it could be, but is not actually making contact?
Yes, Mark Gilfa, who's our director of stewarding and used to be the executive director of the Kentucky Horseracing Commission, he's working very hard at that, sort of working very hard at getting the stewards on the same page, harmonized, but also making them feel empowered. I think there was a little bit of concern when we first launched that a steward might make a mistake, they may let a violation go and get in trouble with us. And what Mark's been very good at doing is explaining that these are judgment calls, and the stewards, for the most part, are the ones who have the expertise and the training to identify whether something is truly a strike, and also whether or not it's being used for safety, because obviously we have an allowance for safety. So I think we're getting better at that. It's a work in progress, but I think it is about education, empowering the stewards, and also making sure that everyone's sort of implementing the rules the same way.
You mentioned there's been far fewer loss of purses as a result of the crop violations. One, going back to last September 24th, was in the Albuquerque handicap. A horse named Sheriff Brown lost his purse as a result of jockey Oscar Ceballos going over the limit. That was appealed, and it's still on appeal. What's the delay on that? So
the decision was actually issued by HISA on March 6th, I believe, or it was heard on March 6th and issued sometime thereafter, but it's been appealed to the Federal Trade Commission. So now it's in that sort of pipeline.
Okay, and they're the final arbiter for HISA, and
you could appeal on narrow grounds to a federal court afterwards, but for the most part, yes.
And is that just a matter then of them putting together a committee to hear this?
It's a matter of them putting together a committee. It would be obviously their first appeal, so them finalizing their process and obviously deciding what entity or what people are the right people to hear that appeal.
So I remember going
shortly, but.
Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
No. So I think it's quite imminent, but yes, the delay is unfortunately because it's the first one, and the FTC has to, of course, figure out their process.
I remember going back and watching the video of that race in question, and for some of the tracks, their simulcast signal hasn't really caught up to the point where things are as clear to catch things that look like a flash versus a whip strike. What's the challenge in terms of technology gap? You have some tracks that have clear HD, footage that you can go back and clearly see if there's what's going on there, but some of them, the feeds are still kind of not great.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right, and it is a challenge, and it's one that also, the board that reviews these cases is, focused on, because they want to make sure that they can actually see what they need to see. What we've tried to do is use the stewards who are actually present, who are actually looking at it, I guess, on a closed caption screen, to understand their view, to engage with the jockey, to give the jockey an opportunity to give their perspective, and to close the gap that way. But you're right. I think as an industry, we need to continue to strive to get everyone on the same page technologically.
Another major racetrack safety issue was what we saw happen at Churchill Downs this spring, with so many fatalities in such a short period of time. At the time, HISA was not able to say, hey, we need to cease racing at this track. You can make a recommendation. Is that something you're contemplating changing?
Yeah, so that is something that we're looking at changing. I think one of the reasons why we're looking at putting a rule in place is that power used to reside, and to some extent does reside, with the racing commissions. But some commissions have taken the position that since HISA preempts them on safety rules, that they no longer have really the authority to shut a racetrack down for safety. And because we don't want there to be a gap essentially in the regulatory system, and because the HISA Act says that we should essentially have the same powers that the State Racing Commission does, we think we need to step into that void. I did read somewhere that someone was suggesting that you might have the authority to do that for any reason at all. That's not true. Our rule would only address a very significant safety concern that required immediate attention in order to protect horses and riders.
Joe?
I'm good.
Oh, so just the last thing I wanted to ask you about then is HISA has been challenged in multiple lawsuits. There have been some losses, but there have been more wins. And actually where things stand right now is that the two biggest challenges in Texas and I think Kentucky had both been won at the district level and in Kentucky at the Court of Appeals level. What is the legal status of the constitutional challenges right now?
So I think we have a little bit of some breathing room, which I'm really delighted about because it gives us a chance to really get our anti-doping and medication control program up and running and to show the industry, how important it is and what a big impact it can make on protecting our game. But the answer to your question is the Sixth Circuit is, as you know, the court has issued, the appeals court ruled. So I think that's just a question of whether or not it's going to be appealed to the Supreme Court. On the Fifth Circuit case, my understanding is that it's set for oral argument in October. And so I imagine there'll be a decision, around the end of the year. Very hard to predict how quickly courts will move, but it certainly won't be earlier than the latter half of the year.
Well, Lisa, thanks so much for joining us. You've answered a lot of questions, given out some good information. I hope our listeners, our watchers will gain from this because it's a different ballgame right now. And I think it's a better one because of having one set of rules nationally. Thank you. I really appreciate it. Thank you both very much for having me today. And it's always a joy to be on the show. All right. Well, that's going to do it for this week's edition of the Friday Show, brought to you by the Jockey Club. We will see you next week.
Support award-winning independent horse industry journalism and become a Paulick Report Insider on Patreon. For as little as $5 a month, insiders get access to exclusive Q&As with Paulick Report staff, insight behind our editorial process, exclusive opinions and on-site analysis, Paulick Report merch, and more. This is not a paywall. The website you know and love will always be the same. But if you want more, and you want to make our coverage even better, visit patreon.com/Paulick Report and become a Paulick Report Insider today.